Let's call him Max. Max is a CEO, and he comes to coaching rather reluctantly. His all-female team has threatened to quit unless he gets some help. He says he values them and he's not gender biased. After all, he hired all of them. However, his habit of continually interrupting them at every meeting and dismissing every idea is driving them out the door. Fran comes to coaching to increase her confidence. She's 6 feet tall, and yet she hunches over. She speaks softly. And she reports that she hasn't been promoted in a couple of years, and meanwhile, all of her male colleagues are passing her by and taking credit for her ideas. How do you approach these two coaching challenges? And should you be curious about gender differences? Absolutely. So before I introduce you to the gender map, I just want to answer the question you might have, which is, why did I get interested in this, and why is it important to all of you? Well, when I began my career as a lawyer, I have to confess that I was gender blind. I actually thought that any suggestion that men and women were wired differently, I would just bristle at that suggestion because it might suggest that women were inferior. And I guess I confess that I also a little bit more comfortable with the masculine style, having grown up with brothers and comfortable with the bold talk and the banter and all of that. And it served me well as a trial attorney and as a law firm partner. However, when I became an executive coach 10 years ago, I realized I needed to flex my style a lot. I needed to awaken my inner Fran, or maybe I should say Pam, and I created the Gender Alliance Map. And in this map, I used it to help expand my own authentic style and then to understand the men and the women I coached. So what's at the root of gender differences? Well, of course, nature and nurture. What we know from the neuroscientists, that I was right, 90% of our brains are the same. However, in that remaining 10%, there are 100 differences, and some of them are very critical. Add to that mix the gendered patterns of communication as well as our culture and how that's influenced our behavior. We have two overlapping curves, and at one end are the bullies, the other end the bimbos, and in the middle are us sages, of course. This gender continuum is actually at the pinnacle are two prototypes, Max and Fran, for illustration purposes only. So what do we do with this on the gender map? What I've done is created the pairs of key gender differences, the polarities, in the way in which a Max and a Fran tend to communicate, act, lead, and think. So today we're just going to cover two of them, and I'm going to zoom in on the bottom right quadrant to see if we can figure out what's derailing CEO Max. And look at the first one there, divergent versus convergent. Let me explain. Remember those 100 differences in the brain? Well, because of the differences in structure between male and female brains, as well as wiring on both sides, and hormones, of course, under stress, what happens is a male brain, when working on a complex problem, focuses in all the activity in one area of the brain, and the female brain diverges activity in both hemispheres, so it's all lit up like a pinball machine. And what you are seeing there is a female brain at rest is more active than a male brain working on a complex problem. So, what do we do with all of this? Of course, we need both to succeed, don't we? And when you are coaching Max, what are you going to do? You don't have a brain scan in your office. Well, you have to notice the patterns. Suppose your Max comes in like this and he says, I read that leadership book and I condensed it to a single sentence. Can you say convergent? Take out the map, and instead of allowing him to be subject to this, make it an object. Put the map on the table and ask him, where are you on the divergent, convergent scale? Where is your team? Where do you need to be to motivate them? What's the highest value of each type of thinking, and how do you capture that? One CEO I coached actually started using a flip chart to capture the divergent ideas. Next, let's turn to another quadrant, the communications quadrant, and see if we can pick one of these polarities to figure out what might be causing Fran's diminishing behavior. That that polarity is directive versus suggestive. Now, this is primarily driven by culture. In our society in the US, Maxes are taught to maximize their presence and to directly demand what they want and compete until they get it. And Frans, on the other hand, are taught to minimize their presence and politely suggest what they need and collaborate. So what about our Fran? Does she really lack confidence? Or is that just a stereotype? She is 6 feet tall. Perhaps she got feedback early on that she was too intimidating, and so she overcorrected. She ruminated on both sides of her brain about this, and she's developed a gender habit of slouching. She developed a gender habit of suggesting rather than directly requesting, a gender habit of waiting her turn, which never came. So what do you do about this? You bring out the map again and have her tell you, where does she think she lands on the direct versus suggestive spectrum? Where is her team? What is her culture like? What does she need to be in order to accomplish her goals? And then create some awareness practices so that she starts noticing and shifting her style of requesting, direct versus suggestive, and expanding her body language. So the bottom line is, what do we do with all of this as coaches? Well, I have Barry's permission to use this. When I heard him speak 8 years ago, he gave this to me, and it's a very dynamic instrument that you can use with your clients. And it's critical that we know this and we are curious about gender. Why? Because a Fortune 100 company actually recently fired half of their external coaches for being gender blind. We need to know this stuff. And we are not supposed to be just making Frans into Maxes. If you don't know this, then you might have coached that Fran to lean in to become a maxed out Max. At 6 feet tall, are you kidding? Of course she'd be intimidating. That wouldn't accomplish her goals. So we need to be aware of this. And what's the first step? All of you need to decide and know, where are you on the Max Fran scale? You probably know where I am, but what's important is, where are you? And where are your clients? And where do they need to be? Help them to not approach this as a dichotomy like the last speaker, but actually a polarity, and embrace the value, the upside of each type of style. We need to train the brain to notice and name these, and then not judge, and actually hold an open mind. Do not stereotype. So can you get around this by just simply saying, well, I only coach the same gender and same generation, so I don't need to know any of this stuff? Well, today we're talking about gender differences. Another day I'll talk to you about that overlap. Some women are Maxines, and some men are named Francis. And the millennials, well, that's another story. What we need to do here today is simply take the Gender Alliance map and be curious about it and figure out what your gender blind spots are. Because we can only figure out what our clients are if we know where ours are. And my last question I leave for you is this: how will you stay gender curious? Thank you.